Carroll County line. Clive Lewis is dead tonight, so I'm here. And here we are, that long stretch of cold gray days between Martin Luther King and St. Patrick's Day. It's the time of year when those least hardy of we Hoosiers run away to more temperate climates. Those of us who choose to stay behind will scrape windshields, leave our gloves someplace, and by March, be amazed that we can shovel snow and be comfortable wearing only a sweatshirt and jeans. There's always something to celebrate about in Indiana. We're racing up to a date we celebrate every year. I caught the feeling as soon as Kroger cleaned out aisles 8 through 13 to make way for boxes of candy, teddy bears, and cards of all sizes and sentiments. When I wanted a gallon of milk, and instead I came away with an anxiety attack. Valentine's Day puts a lot of pressure on guys, we insignificant others. Should we try to make reservations at some fancy restaurant? What's the perfect Valentine's gift? What about a special night in one of those adult-only motels? It doesn't seem wise to ignore the whole idea as a marketing scam and try to pretend that February 14th is just another day on the calendar. There are certain expectations that come along in a relationship. I only understand this now because I've been married twice. But as commercial as it seems these days, Valentine's Day has a long and storied history that doesn't revolve around the card company's bottom line. The history of Valentine's Day actually finds its roots in ancient Rome and Victorian England, and it's not as rosy as some might want to believe. Saint Valentine actually refers to several historical people. We don't really know which Valentine the holiday celebrates. The Catholic Church has records of at least 3 different martyrs named Valentine. In the 3rd century Rome, the Emperor Claudius II outlawed marriage for military-aged men, but a priest named Valentine defied the emperor and continued marrying couples in secret. When Claudius got wind of it, he had the priest killed, martyred in the name of love. Another Valentine supposedly helped Christians escape from a Roman prison. This story doesn't seem to have much of anything to do with romantic love, but early Christians must have thought of him as a hero. He too was caught and executed, martyred in the name of love again, but this time for Christ. Whichever saint the holiday remembers, we generally agree that he was kind, heroic, and most importantly, very much in love with love. Like some other Christian holidays, we may have first begun celebrating Valentine's Day in February to draw attention from a pagan holiday at the same time. There's always a flip side. In this case, that's a fertility festival dedicated to Faunus, the Roman god of agriculture, and to Romulus and Remus, the founders of Rome. During the festival, Roman clerics visited the cave where Romulus and Remus were said to have been raised by a she-wolf. Inside the cave, a goat and dog were sacrificed for purification and fertility. Then, with great reverence, they dipped the animal's hide in blood, went into the streets and slapped random women with it. Officially, this ritual was performed to encourage fertility in the new year, but it may have actually been designed to encourage women to have more sex. I simply have to talk to you about this. I know it's not polite conversation, but it's very hard to discuss Valentine's Day, love and romance and marriage without dipping into the nuts and bolts of the whole thing. Let's begin by looking at the Christian context and ignore for the moment a blood-spattering foreplay ritual. There's at least one troublesome implication of Christian love: the virtue of chastity. Yes, that problematic aspect of Christianity which defines who may have sex with whom and when they may have it. I don't think the people are judged on the basis of chastity anymore. Not unless it involves adultery or some form of perversion which everybody can agree upon is disgusting. but people continue to judge on the basis of decency. It's important not to confuse chastity with modesty in the sense of decency, and we should probably consider that ever-evolving social values dictate standards of dress and what topics or terms may be discussed in a particular group of people in order to be considered decent. Over the course of history, there seems to have been an ebb and flow about what's acceptable and what's not. For example, my lovely and long-suffering wife Teresa would never consider going out in public dressed like her granddaughters. Yet for them it's perfectly acceptable within their peer groups. A couple years ago, our oldest granddaughter was home from college. Now, she's a very sensible young woman, but I was kind of shocked by her appearance. I thought her clothing and bare midriff were too revealing and told her so. I expressed my concerns that college-aged boys may form the wrong impression. Now, I don't know anything about my granddaughter's degree of chastity, and I don't want to know. With today's moral standards, I've learned it's impossible to determine a person's level of morality, sexual or otherwise, based on the style of their clothing. Not that it makes much difference, except that in my mind, our granddaughter was breaking some rule of propriety. In reflection, I think our granddaughter's manner of dress simply made me uncomfortable. Here's another example. Just a few weeks ago, I mentioned to our daughter that I had tried to recruit a very witty, funny, smart, and hot young woman from our church as a co-host for these podcasts. My daughter quickly reprimanded me and suggested as to why this woman probably declined my offer. Apparently, it's totally inappropriate these days to notice a woman's attractive features. Such behavior is considered sexualizing, a word I'd never heard before, but I guess that's a bad thing. Seems like just yesterday it would have been considered a compliment, which was, by the way, how I intended. So it's unkind for my granddaughter to make me uncomfortable with her style of dress, and it's unkind for me to make women uncomfortable by sexualizing their appearance. Yet, strict adherence to the rules of propriety, good manners, and so forth are not proof of morality. Wearing a revealing top is no more an indication of promiscuity than being complimented for looking sexy. I'll admit, these rules are a little complicated for an old guy who came of age during the whatever gets you through the night pre-AIDS decade. But I think the relaxation and simplification of these rules is a good development. The challenge is that people of different ages and backgrounds don't all agree on the same standards. It can get pretty confusing for everybody. Older folks, like Grandma and me, need to be cautious about judging young people as morally corrupt simply because they don't adhere to our traditional standards. Likewise, young people should not label their elders as prudish just because we're reluctant to adopt the new standards. Most of this confusion would be alleviated if we all genuinely try to believe the best about each other and make them as comfortable as possible. I think we can all agree so far. But back to chastity, maybe the least favorite of the Christian virtues, but you can't get around it. According to the old Christian rules, you can either be married and completely faithful to your partner, or you can do without. It's a hard pill to swallow because it really goes against our natural instincts and raises the question, either Christianity is mistaken or our instincts have gone awry. It has to be one or the other. As a Christian, I think it's our instincts which have gone a little upside down. And this is why. The biological purpose of sex is procreation, just like the biological purpose of eating is nourishment. If I were to eat whatever I want, and as often as I want, I'd eventually hurt myself. But not to an extreme. I may sit down and eat a double portion, but eventually I'll find myself satisfied. Sometimes, as our mother said, your eyes are bigger than your stomach, but not to a significant extent. On the other hand, if a healthy young man could have sex with a woman as often as he wanted, and if his girlfriends all kept getting pregnant, like before he grew impotent or bored, he could easily populate all of Gilligan's Island. This demonstrates a ridiculously excessive appetite that goes well beyond its function. It also answers a question I've had since puberty, which was, why isn't anybody on Gilligan's Island having sex? But let's get back to this and consider another example. A porn movie can attract a large audience who will sit through 10 minutes of ridiculous dialogue before anything truly significant pops up. Now, imagine a movie featuring a covered plate. A voiceover hints at what may be under the napkin in mouth-watering detail. Finally, and at last, the napkin's removed to reveal a fantasy meal. The most perfectly broiled meat, the brightest vegetables and buttery potatoes. Should we conclude from the popularity of pornography and cooking shows that we're all starving for more sex? We're just starving. Is pornography the consequence of sexual deprivation or sexual corruption? Are we living in famine? Or is obesity a serious health threat in America? Well, we've got plenty of stuff to eat and people are fat, with all sorts of negative health consequences. So let's discard the hypothesis of starvation as a reason for this food fascination. Similarly, before we accept sexual deprivation as the reason for pornography, we should examine whether people are having more or less sex now than before. What do you think? Despite a few upside-down numbers, which may have been unintended consequences of an oversaturated market, I've been able to find no evidence of widespread sexual deprivation anywhere nor any time in history. Contraception has made sexual indulgence easier and safer, both inside and outside of marriage, and for the last 60 years. Public opinion is also more accepting of illicit relationships, and even perversion, than it has been since the days of Claudius. Our sexual appetites, like our appetite for food, grow stronger with indulgence. We've been told incessantly that sexual desire is just another function, like digestion. It's suggested if we abandon our outdated Victorian idea of suppressing it, everything will be just fine. But it's not. Today I can point to just about any item in a hardware catalog, and somebody, someplace, wants to have sex with it. Our obsessions with sex have led to some pretty horrifying perversions lately. And this is where the virtue of chastity, of moderation, plays a role in a romantic relationship. In Valentine's Day. Just to be clear, although several saints have recommended it as a lifestyle, I'm not endorsing total abstinence here. I would like you to simply consider the respectful use of sexuality within the boundaries of a relationship. Chastity encompasses the emotional, physical, and spiritual dimensions of the relationship and calls for a deep understanding of your partner's needs and desires. It's challenging to maintain respectful sexuality in a romantic relationship as we try to figure out the complexities of intimacy and commitment. But the rewards, like promoting mutual respect and self-control, like cultivating a safe and comfortable environment, like reinforcing a commitment to your shared values, and yes, even more sexual fulfillment can be yours. At its core, chastity is a virtue that promotes the responsible use of sexuality. Here's why all that's a good idea. Promiscuity, adultery, pornography, and any compulsion having anything to do with sexual behavior wrecks relationships and families. The family, in nearly every culture, is the core of society because it's the place where its members are most personally affected. The kitchen table is still the easiest place to instill values and create change. When families come together in a common belief, they lift each other up. And these traits are bred into society. But family life, like the values of our society, have changed. Two-parent households are on the decline in the United States as divorce, remarriage, cohabitation are on the rise. While in the early 1960s, babies were typically born within a marriage, today, fully 4 in 10 births occur to women who are single or living with a non-marital partner. Before I make the next statement, I need to qualify it by admitting that I know a few mothers who've raised successful men and women, but only a few, and I consider them to be heroes. If you've been paying attention, you must have surely noticed the tragic consequences of family breakdown. Fatherless children are more likely to suffer from psychological development problems, to grow up in poverty, to quit school, engage in violence, abuse drugs and alcohol, and wind up in prison. And to think that we might have prevented much of this tragedy with just a little self-control. Yeah, you might say. So, what are we supposed to do on Valentine's Day? Well, here's my advice. Forgive. Put your pride on a shelf and treat your partner like you want to be treated. In other words, try putting God in your relationship. But the Christian view of sexual morality seems a bit quaint these days, and some may be driven away from God by the words of chaste old men. And as much as we see that promiscuity is damaging our families and society, it's not the central focus of Christian values. No, a greater threat to relationships is something few people can admit to themselves. A trait that, except for this strange fascination with Donald Trump, is seldom admired. I'm talking about pride, immodesty, arrogance, self-importance. Pride leads to every other vice, and we're all guilty. Pride will cause us to look down on people, including our partner. And while we're looking down, we're not looking up. This Valentine's Day, if you find yourself in a marriage and that you're part of a family with children, please don't forget about them. The best Valentine you can give to your children is to love their mom. Maybe Valentine's Day isn't the right occasion to start a campaign for respectful sexuality. Still, maybe we should consider that this Valentine's Day falls on the first day of Lent. Something to think about while you're in the card aisle. Happy Valentine's Day.